How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about Donald Trump issuing 2 more pardons. Now, these pardons are very important because of the whole situation surrounding it. Now, the 2 individuals that were pardoned are Dwight and Steven Hammond. Dwight is 76 years old. Steven is 49. They are father and son cattle ranching team up there in Oregon. They were convicted in 2012 of arson, and there's been a whole roller coaster ride as it relates to their original sentence, release, resentence, and then readmittance to jail on essentially the same charges. Now, before we get into that whole situation, why they were in jail, how they got back to jail, why they're pardoned, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the so-called federal building takeover, which was in part on their behalf and also in part on behalf of other things. Dwight and Steven Hammond were not involved with that particular thing because they were obviously in jail. They couldn't have been involved with the protests if they were in jail or on the way to jail. So that wasn't their deal. That was initiated by Ammon Bundy and then Clavin Bundy. Ammon Bundy is Clavin Bundy's son. I guess Ammon had heard about it, so he petitioned his father and a bunch of other guys to come so-called occupy federal building. And by the way, you'll hear that a lot over the next couple of days in the news media. The federal building is not what you think. When you think federal building, you're like, okay, did they go into the NSA and beat up the clerk and take a high-ranking official hostage? No. I'll place the so-called federal building on the screen before you, and you're able to see what it is. It's like a wildlife reserve. You go there, it's like a deck. You got some coffee, some visitors pamphlets, that type of thing. And when they actually occupied it, it was on a holiday weekend and nobody was there. And I think they got a key from somewhere. Didn't even really break the window. Like, it wasn't a big deal. They went to the place that was unoccupied and they camped out. Now, I'm not saying it's okay to just walk into a place and do that, but let's just put it in proper context. And let's also detach the Hammonds away from this because the Hammonds were not involved. Yes, their case may have started the situation, but that was not their doing. So let's just get that clear. So if anybody says, oh, you can just occupy a federal building and get pardoned, no, we'll talk about people that were involved with the federal building a little bit later. Let's go back to Steven and Dwight Hammond and why this case is important. They were arrested, convicted or whatever in 2012 of arson. And what happened was different than what the judge said happened. Dwight and Steven said that they had did a controlled burn on their land as basic land maintenance to prevent an invasive species of plant from overtaking their land that they needed for cattle ranching. In the court decision, which I'll place in the box below, they said, I'm talking about the court now, they said they burned land to conceal illegal game hunting. Like, they killed some deer on federally owned land and then they burned the land to conceal the actual illegalities going on, which doesn't make any sense because why would you burn land which is also illegal if you're trying to cover up an illegal act? But I'll move on. Dwight and Steven said that they did a controlled burn on their land that they own, but it accidentally spread to the federal land and burned 139 acres. Regardless of what was going on, a deal was reached in Oregon with the local people, the local judges. Dwight was given, I think, 3 or 4 months in jail, and his son, Steven, was given 1 year in jail. So they went to jail, they served their time, and they come home. A few months, maybe a couple years later, they get a knock on the door, and it's from the federals. The federal judge in Oregon or in that district, that area, had vacated the sentences they got before and gave them a new sentence because they said at the time they got was illegal because there's a federal mandatory minimum for committing arson on federally owned land. And this federally owned land is the Bureau of Land Management. And for the purpose of this video, we'll call it a BLM. So they burned the BLM land and they got resentenced actually to 5 years on a mandatory minimum minus time served. And this happened in 2016. So I think the father, Dwight, will be coming home next year. and the son will be coming home a little bit later, or pardon me, a little bit earlier, because he got a year versus the father who got like 3 or 4 months. So the father and the son had been in jail this whole time. They petitioned Trump and the White House, the administration, to get their sentences commuted, not necessarily to get a pardon, which is different. A pardon expunges your record. It says you didn't do it at all. There's nothing there. A commutation says, yes, you did do it. You may not be able to have your rights all the way as a regular citizen. You still may be a felon, but you get home early, basically. Instead of getting an actual commutation, they got a full pardon, which is better. So this is really good. This kind of validates the point that they were making and the point that the protesters are making, which was of federal overreach. How are you going to come in and say that the jail sentence I got was too little? I mean, really, it appears to be a mistake, because if it should have been a federal mandatory minimum, how did I go to jail and serve my time without that being there? If you make a mistake, federal government, then that's on you. Don't make me suffer. If I go to jail, come home, and then I got to go back to jail, that's not how that works. It kind of seems like double jeopardy. Now, let's move on from Dwight and Steven, who have been pardoned, so they should be coming home like right now, which is a great thing. Hopefully everything is good. They're able to resume their lives with their families. Let's move on to the protest, which is linked to this story, but it's not directly connected. Like I said earlier, the Hammonds were not involved with the protest. I think at this point they were either in jail or on the way back to jail. They were not up there occupying this so-called government building, which again is nothing more than a glorified rest stop. The people who were involved with this, some of them went to jail. Unfortunately, you had LaVoy Vinicum, who got shot and killed by police. Very sad situation, but some of the guys went to jail. Now, Ammon and Cliven, and I think 2 of the people, one of the other sons of Cliven and one other guy, they had been held for about a year or a little bit less for the whole government takeover kerfuffle. They had been held without bail for a year without being convicted. And the judge, Gloria Navarro of the U.S. District Court in Nevada, actually dismissed all of their charges against them with prejudice, which means that they could not be brought up on charges again. And it's kind of a complicated reason why that happened, but basically it was not enough evidence, and there seemed to be some bullying going on from the prosecution. So they are not in jail at all right now, so there's no need to actually pardon them. The judge in the case did what was necessary because of the dismissing with prejudice. They cannot be brought up on charges again, so that's good. Justice has most certainly been served. And the bigger issue here is a federal overreach. The Bureau of Land Management, mandatory minimums for accident. I mean, it's just too much. And this is part of what happens, not to pardon, of course, but them going to jail at all and the protests happening at all is a result of large government. It becomes too bloated, and it often ignores the needs and the wants of the regular everyday person. Okay. Cliven Bundy, Ammon Bundy shouldn't have been in jail. They shouldn't have had to actually go to the place to do the protest to begin with. Dwight and Steven Hammond shouldn't have been locked up because they already been to jail. The sentence that they got was enough because it was a little bit of evidence that they were involved with illegal game hunting, but it was also evidence that the actual land burning was an accident. So for that, what they got originally was enough. For the federal government to come back and give them more time is the reason why Trump had to step in and say, okay, you guys can go home. This is just too much. It was overreached by the Obama administration because the person that came was a judge. I forget her name, but that was of the federal court. It was not of the local court in Oregon. So that's pretty much all I got to say. Trump is doing a good job with the pardons, and the offer is still out there to the NFL guys. Remember, he said, hey, if you have anybody that you think was wrongly incarcerated, then contact me and we'll see what we can do. Kim Kardashian went to the White House and talked about Alice Marie Johnson. 1 week later, she was home. Dwight and Steven Hammond petitioned the White House. I'm not really sure when they did that, but they're coming home. So if you have anybody, give them to the president. I think he said recently, the president that is, that nobody has contacted him from the NFL, and that's really a shame. These guys taking knees, talking about police brutality, my cousin, my grandma, X, Y, and Z are locked up, but you don't want to give any names to the president to actually release. It seems pretty lazy, and it also makes me feel like your whole cause is bogus, because if it was true, then you would have a list of people that you can hand to the president right now. As soon as he said that, you should have emailed him or called Sarah Huckabee Sanders or somebody to give the list to him, or to go on television. Matter of fact, as I close, what you could have done is this: rather than being like Malcolm Jenkins or whatever his name is, holding up the card talking about you're not listening, you could have held up a name list of people that you want to see come home from the penitentiary. Don't go to the White House if you don't want to. At least do that. But you didn't do that. You're taking time to get attention to yourself. And it's not even about those who are locked up. It's about you getting personal attention, which is why the whole kneeling kerfuffle is just a load of malarkey. It's nothing other than guys that want to be seen without their helmet get attention. But that's pretty much all I got to say about that. What say you? Do you think it's a good thing that Dwight and Steven Hammond are going to be released from the penitentiary? Is it a bad thing? Should they have not been in jail to begin with? And how about the protesters? Is there anyone else still locked up from that? I'm not really sure if it is. I think everybody pretty much started to go home towards the end, and they didn't have to meet the final standoff. If there's anybody still locked up, please let me know. Matter of fact, you can let me know, but also let the president know. So if they're in there and they haven't really done anything, if they're in there unjustly, they'll be able to get out as well. But that's pretty much all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.